Okay, I'm going to call the Corporate Services Committee meeting to order. We'll start off by reading the following statement. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternative formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. I'll look to any, actually, I'm just going to outline for colleagues the way that we're going to handle the agenda, and then I'll go through disclosures of interest and consent. We have scheduled, as you can see, item 6.1 is interviews for the London Council for Adult Education and Eldon House Board of Directors. Those interviews have been scheduled at the start of the meeting for the candidates. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the agenda where we proceed after disclosures into moving into camera for just 6.1. We will conduct the interviews. If we're ready to make any sort of decisions based on those interviews, we'll be able to do that when we come out of camera. Then we will proceed through the rest of the consent items and the items for direction, and then deal with the remainder of the in-camera items, which we would return to at the end of the meeting. So if no one has any objections, that's how we're going to proceed through today's agenda. Great. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, then as I had just said, we would look for a motion to go in camera for item 6.1. Moved by Vice Chair Kaibaga, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. We'll make that vote on the system.
Closing the vote, and that motion carries 5-0.
Just to give you a sense, we have about an hour and 20 minutes of interviews scheduled. Yesterday when we did interviews, we ran ahead of schedule, so I anticipate we'll be about an hour, hopefully, if we run on the same schedule, but that's my estimate, so we'll be at least an hour, I would think. did the interviews for the London Council for Adult Education. So at this time, the committee can make a recommendation. We would have a public discussion. I would remind committee members, if there is a public discussion, that anything that was disclosed to us by candidates in camera needs to stay there. We cannot discuss that publicly, but they also all have public applications as well. And I would look to committee for some sort of direction based on the interviews that we've now held for that particular position. Councillor Helmer.
I'd like to circulate a ranked ballot so we can, I think we should rank all the candidates and then figure out who the most preferred is that way.
Yes, I'm going to look to see if there's consensus to that. We will have to prepare a ranked ballot. We don't have one prepared for at this exact moment. So if there's consensus from the committee members that we want to proceed and do a ranked ballot for the decision based on our interviews, then if you have an objection to that, let me know. Otherwise, that's the way we're going to proceed. But we will need a little bit of time to prepare that ranked ballot. Okay, it looks like everybody is in consensus. Councillor Helmer.
Is the concern that we're waiting for staff to be here to talk about the other items? Because we do have a whole other agenda of public business that we could be talking about.
Yes, and so I think what we're gonna do is if committee's okay, I'd look for a motion for a 5-minute recess. We do need staff to return to continue with the consent. So either the ranked ballot will be ready or staff will be back and we can proceed with the agenda at that time. Our efficiency was just a little too quick. So a 5-minute recess? Oh, okay, they're all, you know what? We don't really need a recess because they're all back. So look at that, just by filling the air with talking, we've now got ourselves in a position where we can carry on with the agenda. So when the ranked ballot is ready, I'll let committee know and we can decide to proceed with that decision making. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll now proceed with the consent agenda. There are items 2.1 through 2.6 on the consent. Would anybody like to deal with any of those separately? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you. If we could pull 2.1.
Okay, we'll remove 2.1. Does anybody else want something removed? Okay, well then we can prepare a motion with the rest. Is there a mover for the rest of the consent items? Councillor Helmer, Councillor Hillier. We'll put that up on the screen.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, and that motion carries 6-0.
So we'll circle back to 2.1, which was pulled by Councillor Van Meerbergen. This is the assessment growth for 2019. There is a report there. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes, thank you. So I'm looking at this report, and so we're looking at 1.96% for assessment growth in 29. This would be for 2019. My general question really pertains to how we're using assessment growth funds, like the revenue from assessment growth. There was a time when we would take a portion of it and put it towards reducing taxes. Can you give me a more definitive idea of what's currently taking place?
Yes, I'll have the treasurer outline the assessment growth policy.
Thank you. So I think it was about approximately 2010, there was a new policy that was passed with respect to assessment growth and how that is essentially done. And we will be touching on this on Thursday during the budget process. So essentially what the policy does is, as a result of assessment growth that occurs, there are costs associated with that. So assessment growth has essentially been taken out of the budget process and is allocated to service growth costs on a specific business case basis. So that process actually typically occurs after the budget process and is outside of the budget process. So we will be reporting on Thursday a little bit more detail of how that links to the budget, but specifically the policy speaks to the business case process and how costs are brought forward. So typically those come forward in March of each year, and what it shows is the total amount of assessment growth, what the number of business cases are specifically to service the costs of a growing city. So they would range anywhere from snow plowing, new signal lights, to servicing parks and garbage collection. So it's a variety of different costs. And some of them may include the capital, where you might have a new crew that you might be needed. There would be components there that you might require new grass cutting equipment, as an example, just to show. So that process comes forward, and based on how the costs are put forward, if there's any excess, there is based on the policy, what the excess does is there is 50% of it on a one-time basis that goes towards debt reduction. And the remaining 50% goes towards the capital infrastructure reserve fund to support additional needs from the capital infrastructure gap that is been an ongoing problem with the municipality to support capital projects towards that. So that process and that policy has been in place for some time. On Thursday, what we will provide through the budget process is a summary of what the total assessment growth is and a summary of what the business cases are towards that. And we'll walk through that process in a little bit more detail.
Okay, so basically, those revenues are baked in to whatever projection you're giving to us. So for example, if it's 2.7, that's already with the assessment growth baked in.
So through the chair, those projections exclude assessment growth specifically. That is based on the current assessment. Assessment growth is then removed and the business cases go towards that growth. So the 1.96 is approximately $11 million worth of additional revenue. And then when the business cases are supported against that, if there are any excess, it would be determined at that time. And then based on, typically the council policy would apply, but certainly it has occurred before where, notwithstanding the policy, council has done something different with that.
Okay, thank you.
So just to paraphrase a little bit, the revenues aren't in the budget process, but neither are the costs associated with growth. And then on Thursday, we'll get a little bit more information about the differences between those and whether there's any excess in the budget process on Thursday, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Any other questions on the assessment growth report? Seeing none, moved by, are you looking to comment? Go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair to our staff, I know in, I believe it was 2017, we see the year where there's a little bit of a down dip in terms of a little lower weighted assessment growth. I seem to recall that that was a result partly of a lot of conversions that were going on between classes, and so we had different amount of revenue coming in because the weightings were a bit different because the conversions had happened. I'm assuming, just looking at the top line numbers, that we're seeing some kind of slowing or, not the same kind of conversions that we were seeing in the past. I just wonder if our staff could comment briefly on that.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. I think you're referring to numerous condominium conversions that occurred. Yeah, that has seemed to slow down a great deal.
If I recall, I think that year it was 1.2, and then a 0.3 was related to conversions, but I may be wrong. I see some nodding. We don't go by my numbers, but that's what I recall from the discussion. Any other questions on assessment growth? I'll look for a mover and a seconder of this report. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Kebaga. We will do that on the screen.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 6-0.
We've exhausted the consent items. We have one item for direction. It requires consideration of appointments to the Accessible Advisory Committee. It requires one voting person with a disability and 3 voting members at large. We have 1 person with a disability and 3 members at large, so that would be a complete slate, unless I'm reading this wrong. Councillor Helmer.
I'm going to move all 4 candidates.
Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Mayor Holder. Any debate? Seeing none, we'll open that for voting.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
We have the Corporate Services Committee deferred matters list as well. For those colleagues new, this is a list of outstanding items or directions that have not been completed yet, with an estimated timeline on when those reports will come back. It's an information report for us. However, there's always an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have on the outstanding items. Otherwise, we receive the report, and I'd look for a mover and seconder on that. Councillor Helmer.
I'd like to do both, move it and also ask a question about file number 1.2. I know this is something that the chair myself has asked about in the past. This is the report back from the Integrity Commissioner, and I just wonder if we get an update on that. It says that it's going to be first quarter 2019. I was just wondering if anyone wanted to weigh in on that.
The clerk will weigh in on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure, sorry, I missed part of the question, but I can tell you I have a report coming forward to the next Corporate Services Committee meeting that has revisions to the Council Code of Conduct, local boards, Code of Conduct, disclosure registry, et cetera, as a result of Bill 68. And that has all been reviewed by the Integrity Commissioner. I'm not sure if that answered the question, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, that's helpful to know. So 1.2 is about specifically the ombudsman and a lobbyist registry. So it sounds like much of that's going to be covered in your report.
Go ahead.
Maybe not the ombudsman part.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that part is not in the report. Everything else except that. I am still working with the Integrity Commissioner on reporting back on the lobbyist registry.
So
Thank you.
maybe,
Through the chair, is there anything we need to do to support you in getting the Integrity Commissioner to fulfill this direction?
go ahead.
No, but what I will do through the chair is I'll make sure that we report it by March on this.
Further questions? That was offered to move receipt, I believe, of the deferred matters list by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Kebaga. Any other discussion on the deferred matters list? Seeing none, we will open that for a vote.
Closing the vote, and that motion carries 6-0.
So as was agreed, a rank ballot is prepared for colleagues to rank their rank their choices. I just want to get some clarification maybe from Councillor Helmer. Are you looking for this, just so we're very clear in the future, to be a decision-making mechanism or a determine the highest preference and then you would look to debate or make a motion at that time?
What I'm suggesting we do is what we've done in the past, which is do a ranked ballot, and then when there's a person who comes out at the top of the ranked ballot, then we make a motion to move that person, so that's what I'd like to do.
We'll proceed that way if there's no objections. Councillor Squire.
I could not help but come to when this was dealt with, and based on what I just heard, I'm fairly surprised as to what we've decided to do here. So what in effect, and I want to remind everyone of what the committee is doing now as opposed to what council did. This originally came before council, the full council, with a ranked ballot. The ranked ballot was conducted and someone was elected, as many other people were elected to boards and commissions. Since that, after that, and I didn't vote in support, it was decided to do interviews of the persons. Only 2 committees, as far as I know, the people were required to do interviews, this and one other committee, no other committees. And as far as I was aware, no particular rationale has ever been provided that I heard as to why we're doing interviews for 2 particular committees. And I came today so that I would be able to hear in public session if there was some disqualifying factor for the candidate who won the valid election. Now, what Councillor Helmer, with all due respect, is saying is, let's have a redo. Let's have a redo on the vote. The result last time was A, and we're going to vote on it again because he doesn't want this to be advisory. He wants this to be determinative. So I don't know what we're going to say to people in terms of our integrity when we say, look, if you want to apply for a position, we're going to have an election and we're going to vote on it. And the person with the most votes, after we have an opportunity to speak, and every councillor had a member to speak to people, we would honor that result. So I will continue to speak about this, and I'll continue to speak about it when I hear people talking about how we like to get people with lived experience on committees, because I think there's a real problem with this process. I will speak to it today, and I will speak to it again on council.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor Squire. Is there any other comments as we proceed with the ranking? No? Okay.
Mr. Chair, we have the results.
Are you able to put that on the screen so we can all see the result? If colleagues need, you can flip to the other screen and you can see the results of the ballot. So we have a motion prepared. I can look to council to move it. It is, well, let me just flip so I can let you know what it says. Oh, I can't. Can you read what it says so people know? And we just need the name, so you can insert the name that was the highest ranking in it.
Thank you. Through the chair, that M. Mullner be appointed to the London Council for Adult.
So,
My apologies. I should have had you check it first.
That's why I wanted to see the motion. Can you outline who the highest ranking candidate was, clerk, so that the deputy clerk can insert the name in the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the election process followed, the individuals whose name would be brought forward would be Van de Men, sorry. Based on that individual had the lowest, which is results in that person being successful.
So I need a mover and a seconder for that. If committee is supportive of that result, you'll be able to see. Councillor Helmer, is that a mover or do you want to comment? Councillor Helmer's willing to move. Is there a seconder? Councillor Keabaga? Any discussion? We'll get that up on the screen for voting in a second.
Councillor Van Meerbergen? Closing the vote, and that motion carries 5-1.
That concludes the public portion of the agenda. We do have to go back into camera for items 6.2 through 6.6 and to finish off 6.1 for the Eldon House portion. So I would look for a mover, Councillor Keabaga, and a seconder, Councillor Van Meerbergen. The vote to go back into camera will be on the screen. I will note that will conclude, so we will adjourn the remainder of the meeting from in camera. And just for your reference, the reason why we won't be making a decision on Eldon House today is we have not completed all of the interviews for Eldon House. We will need another committee cycle to do that. So although we have to go back in for interviews as well as the other in-camera items, there won't be a decision on that particular appointment today.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.